Mac Power Users, episode 502. I saw your face on the internet. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I am joined as always by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hello, Mr. Stephen Hackett.
How are you?
Happy to be on the microphone. It's Mac Power Users Day. That's the best day.
It's a good day. I enjoy starting my week with this.
Yeah, it's a feedback episode. These are always fun because there's so much great stuff we get from the listeners, and it gives us a chance to share some of it, check in on a few things. You and I bought some new hardware. We can talk about that today at some point. I'm looking forward to this show.
Yeah, and me too. Before we get started, one last reminder that we have MPU 500 merchandise up. The moment this show goes live, you have about 2 hours if you want to grab a t-shirt. So we're going to be hopefully at the very end of that, and we've been reminding people. So if you have waited, your time is almost up, or up, depending on when you listen to this. But we have coins and stickers and patches as well, too. So that link is over in the show notes. Thank you to everyone who ordered a shirt or ordered something. I look forward to seeing all of those MPU 500 shirts at future live shows and WWDC when we make it out into the world. It's always a real treat.
Now, the coins are going to remain up for a while, right?
Yeah, so the coins and everything we have stock of, and we're just going to sell the stock out however long that takes. So I can't say for sure when that will be, but the T-shirts are a pre-order type deal, so they can be printed. So those have that window.
And the coins and whatnot are running out, so not to create a sense of urgency, but there is a little bit of one here.
I think so. I think it's if you haven't looked at this yet, now is the time.
All right, Stephen, you did a telethon. You guys keep calling it a podcastathon, but I watched it and I saw your face on the internet. So you made a telethon.
We did. Twitchathon. We streamed it on Twitch, which was a new experience for me.
Yeah.
And it's on YouTube now, and the audio's up, so we have linked to all that in the show notes. If you missed it on last Friday, you can still watch it. It'll be on YouTube for all time.
Lots of fun and disturbing things all at once going on that screen. But I wanted to talk to you as a Mac Power user because you ran this thing for 6 hours. There's a ton of technology, and I played a little role in it, and I saw on the back end all the people you had managing things and Slack channels, and you had a bunch of stuff going on at once. How did you make all that work?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking about this because the podcastathon was far more than just me and Mike on screen for 6 hours. We had a lot of guests, including yourself, so thank you again for coming on. It was just a lot of moving parts and a lot of people, so I kind of wanted to start by talking about all the things that went into it, and like there was a control room with 4 or 5, 6 people in it, but it was a 2-camera setup. So Mike and I were in this huge studio with what's called a cyc wall, which is a curved wall. It's painted white, so it gives you the sort of floating in space type vibe like we saw in those old Johnny Ive videos. Like he's trapped in the white room. It looked just like that. We had it lit sort of like this peachy orange color, but you could light it any way you want. And there were 2 cameras, both operated, camera operators. And they had zoom lenses, and they were on big rolly tripods so they could move them around. And you'll see that if you watch the video, lots of different angles. All those came from just from 2 cameras. Mike and I used our regular microphones. In fact, the microphone stands you see are mine. Like, it's what we use in our live shows. He and I, and David, you too, we use the Neumann KMS 105. And it's a great microphone. It was especially great for this environment where there was some background noise and some sort of chaos happening off screen at times, and it didn't pick any of that up, which was really nice. But there was a bunch of Apple hardware too. So we did this demo of the iPhone 11 Pro of the cameras, and that was done via AirPlay to an Apple TV, and then the HDMI from the Apple TV was sent to the control room and captured in their system, so they could just choose the Apple TV as an input.
I get that. That's the common setup these days, right? You get an Apple TV and you can produce anything from iOS. We hear from a lot of people that are afraid to do that because of that wireless component. Mm-hmm. Do you ever have any fear? Or do you have any problems with it?
It behaved pretty well, and there's a lot of equipment in that studio, as you may imagine. The Apple TV was basically right off screen, and so the Apple TV and the phone were very close together. We didn't have any trouble.
I have a friend who just did a a 2-month trial, like a long trial. Same thing. He called me up ahead of time. He's like, well, how do I get because he was using the iPad with TrialPad, which is a great trial app. And I set him up with an Apple TV, and we created a little network in the courtroom. He ran it for 2 months. He didn't have it fail once. I think this is a lot more stable than people give it credit for at this point.
Yeah, we had wanted to run video out over Lightning, but we had some issues with that. Maybe related to iOS 13, I'm not really sure. So we ended up falling back to AirPlay. My only complaint about it was that from the iPhone to the Apple TV over AirPlay, it does support rotation. So if you're in Safari and you turn the phone sideways, it will fill up the TV screen. But for whatever reason, the camera app won't rotate over AirPlay. Oh, no. So if you pay attention during the stream, I think at some point I did turn the phone to landscape, and you can see all the labels turn 90 degrees in the camera app UI, but the camera app itself won't rotate over AirPlay. That seems to be a limitation that's been there for some time. That was a little frustrating to me because I wanted to fill the screen, but it worked well enough, and it was a pretty short demo, so we just kind of lived with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how they missed that.
Who knows?
On, it's like the camera app gets a little use on that device. So.
Right. Mike and I each also had our MacBook Pros. You can see them in frame the whole time. We captured HDMI video and audio from his laptop for a game that he and I played. My MacBook Pro was just there plugged in just for reference, which I'll talk about in a little while. But those MacBook Pros were sort of one of our lifelines out to the real world. And then people like David, when you came on, we used Skype, which is what we normally use here at Relay FM most of the time. This was different because there was video, and we fell back to audio only. Like for Federico, we had trouble, so we just used audio and had a picture of him on screen. But all of that stuff, like cameras, microphones, Skype, Apple TV, all that got piped into the control room. And they were using a TriCaster setup, which is basically some software that allows a controller to have multiple video sources and put them out as one stream in a bunch of different ways. So you'll see, 2-ups where he's like Mike and I at the table, and then David, you're like a floating box over Skype, or having video input like from an Apple TV, or they played their own videos. So really giving them a lot of control of what the audience saw as time went on. And that was, a group of people working. It's a big board with a bunch of buttons and a PC and a bunch of software. And there was a whole team running that setup for us.
I watched a bunch of it in addition to participating. I thought it was really professionally done. I mean, it just seemed like everything was moving really well. The lower thirds were showing up, and you guys did a great job with it. And also, we didn't mention, congratulations. Relay has raised, as we record this, over $250,000 for St. Jude. That is amazing.
It is really humbling. I really mean that sincerely. This is so far beyond what we anticipated or expected the Relay audience. And really, it's bigger than Relay. I mean, it's sort of like the Apple community online has really rallied behind this. And so to raise $250,000, we actually did that in exactly 1 month between the Relay FM Family Feud and the day we hit $250,000. It was exactly 1 month. And that is just breathtaking to me. So if you donated, thank you so much. That is still running to the very end of the month. So if you haven't donated and you would like to, you can go to stjude.org/relay and donate there. But at this point, obviously, a lot of people have, and it's really cool.
Now, I want to make a point that I made a second donation when I went on the air. I put in enough money to require Mike to peel off a sticker and you to put on a sticker. Mm-hmm. And while Mike did take a sticker off, you did not put one on for me.
Well, not live on the air. I didn't have any stickers.
Well, I'm just saying right now that I want, since I bought that sticker, mm-hmm. I want to be able to choose the sticker.
Wow.
Can I have a role in that?
Sure.
I think the listeners in the forum should, in this episode notes, give me some ideas.
Okay.
I would very much like to make this an interesting sticker we put on Steve. Now, nothing mean. We're not going to do it. We're not going there. This isn't a negative show, but you guys give me some good ideas, because I want to. I know how much it drives you crazy, and I just want to get the most of my money right there.
There you go. I had mentioned that we did this on Twitch. And I'm not sure how familiar our listeners are with Twitch. I had basically no experience with it before this campaign. It's effectively a game streaming service. There's a bunch of software, mostly for the PC. There is some Mac software that will interface with Twitch. Most of it's not super good. Unfortunately, this is just an area where the PC is ahead of the Mac, I think, for the most part. But, it live streamed it for us. We had a chat room. We had lots of stats on how many people were watching. And then Twitch actually saves the file as it's being streamed. So we didn't have to create a file, at the end of the night on a computer somewhere. It was basically available to us on Twitch, both to download, and then Twitch actually has just an option to say send to YouTube. So instead of downloading, it was 12 gigabytes at the end of the night. Instead of me downloading that file and then re-uploading it to YouTube, which would have taken forever, basically Twitch can just send it to YouTube, and then YouTube processed it over several hours, and I could just hit publish. So that part actually, the post-production was basically non-existent because the control room did such a good job. There wasn't anything that we needed to take out or change, and then Twitch gave us the tools just to move it to YouTube automatically, which was a huge time saver for me.
But that's the whole business of Twitch, right? It's about streaming gaming. That's their main gig, and that's exactly what you need to do. So I'm sure all those pipes are connected really well between Google and Twitch. In fact, didn't somebody buy Twitch? Which company owns Twitch at this point?
Amazon owns Twitch.
Yeah. Okay. Well, either way, I'm sure they're connected. Well, that must have been nice for you, because I'm sure usually you would have been the one that had to do all that post.
Right. I mean, if anyone's been to our live shows, you'll know that our live shows start by me coming on stage and then hitting record on a bunch of things, right? Like none of that was on us this time. We brought our own microphones because we wanted to, but past that, there was no production work on my part, which was really nice, because that's always something during a live show that is taking up cycles for me. That is always something I'm thinking about. I'm checking the recording, making sure we're okay. And it can be a little distracting. And over the course of 6 hours, I knew that I needed to be in the game as much as possible. And so just knowing that there's a team of professionals at St. Jude and ALSAC who were taking care of this just was a huge weight off my shoulders.
Now, in addition to all the production stuff going on, you also had a whole system for dealing with guests and keeping the content rolling. I know you kept, I noticed watching it, you would be looking at your screen, and you just said earlier, your screen was kind of like your connection.
Right.
How were you doing that? How were you getting the word from who's coming up next and what needs to happen?
Yeah, so there were a couple of ways that we could communicate. So Mike and I were each wearing earpieces. You can see them in a lot of the shots. And the lead in the control room could talk to either Mike or me or both of us at the same time. So if Mike was talking, John would talk to me and say, hey, after this, we're going to go to video, or, we're having trouble getting this guest. You have a few minutes to fill, and just kind of giving us a running clock as things were coming up. The whole evening was laid out in a Google Sheet broken down into 15-minute blocks. Now, several things took up several blocks, but we just worked in 15-minute increments. But we were also using Slack. I picked up very quickly that, especially if fundraising numbers were read to me over the earpiece, that I would lose track of them very quickly. And so we initially were just going to use Slack really for us to talk to the control room, because obviously if we're interviewing somebody, I can't stop and say, oh, hey, control room, how much time do we have left? Over the evening, we sort of adjusted and relied on Slack a little bit more for things like this is coming up, fundraising updates. A lot of the talking points and this much money means this many things was sort of being fed to us through Slack. Every once in a while, we just had sort of a collection of those. And just so as we needed to know things, again, in the hands of a really creative, really professional team, they would communicate with us whichever way was the best. And through those earpieces, we could hear our Skype guests and hear if there was a video. So we could see the stream on a display that was in between the cameras. And if there was St. Jude video content playing, we could hear that through our earpieces as well. So it was just kind of being plugged in enough to know what's going on. But, throughout the evening, you also see us talk to the control room. And we kind of decided to do that because the Relay audience kind of likes the behind the scenes stuff like we're doing right now. And I thought that it would be okay for us to show some of the seams of how this went together. Not a lot of them. In fact, we often use the St. Jude videos to cover up seams, like we're changing sets or someone's coming on or someone's coming off. Showing how some of it was made, I thought was sort of interesting. And so we didn't hide all of it. You can do this in a way where you'll never know that there's anyone else in the room, but we wanted to show that this was a team effort and kind of how it was being put together. So that Google Sheet was being updated, Slack was being updated, people are talking in our ear, and through all of that, we're able to walk through the schedule and make adjustments on the fly.
Yeah, and it was really fun seeing the team effort. I think you made the right call there. I'm just thinking back, to me, like the gold standard on this when I was growing up were those Jerry Lewis telethons. You may be too young to remember them, but they were constantly talking to the control. There was a lot of interaction going on. Everybody knew this was a big production, and I think that's kind of part of the fun. Although I still wish that Mike had undone his bow tie.
Oh, I know.
But apparently that wasn't possible somehow.
It was a real bow tie, but like sort of permanently tied somehow. I don't really know.
Yeah,
I know. I'm sorry about that. But it was neat to do something on such a large scale, because normally it's like with a live relay show, like what you see is what you get. Like even the Family Feud, everything that was happening was being generated on stage. Right? Like Mike was running the scoreboard, I was recording, Jason is there. Like you just see it all, and that's really interesting. I think it adds a fun element to our shows, but this was just too big for that. This required the team of people that were there to help us.
Yeah, and the friendship that you have with Mike and just kind of the roll up your sleeves attitude everybody took towards this thing was obvious as someone watching and inspirational. I think you guys did great.
Thank you.
One question I have for you is, you were on air essentially for 6 hours. I mean,
yeah.
That's hard. If you're listening and you've never done something like this, I mean, like after we record Mac Power Users episode, like I always need like a half hour where I don't talk to anyone and just kind of like go into my shell for about a half hour, maybe take a walk or something. But 6 hours, that's a long time. How did you manage your energy and kind of keep yourself going?
There was a moment about an hour in, maybe an hour and 20 minutes in, that I looked at the clock and I thought, this has been a huge mistake. There's no way we can keep this up. But honestly, after that point, once we were into hour 2, it really wasn't a problem for me. Not that I wasn't tired at the end of it. I definitely was. But staying on target with it wasn't difficult. And I think a lot of it was the excitement of being able to do it and to do such a huge production, such a special thing, and to do it for a cause that I deeply care about. That was plenty, and then that's not to say there wasn't caffeine behind the scenes and those things, but staying engaged with it, like I don't think we got to where we were dragging at the end. And honestly, we were a lot more put together at the end of it. Sometimes after these things, you get at the end of it and you're a little loopy, right? You're a little silly. And I don't think either Mike or I felt that, because we were there for a serious reason. We were there to do a job. That job was to raise money for St. Jude. And being on task with that was not a difficult thing to do. Again, not to say I wasn't tired, not to say that I didn't sleep a lot the weekend afterwards, but it really wasn't, that part wasn't the challenge that I thought it would be initially. And like I said, after we were a couple hours in, the rest of it actually went by pretty quickly for me.
Yeah, well, I think you did a great job. I felt like you were just a little punchy toward the end, but in a good way, kind of like you could feel the end coming punchy. And
sure.
The other thing I noticed from the beginning to the end is you got way more comfortable in that role. Like
yes.
When it started, this was the first time you've ever done anything like this, and you could tell everything was new, but by the end you had kind of figured out, and that brings its own stress relief as you're not doing it for the first time. And after 6 hours, I was so impressed with both you and Mike and the whole team. And there was a bunch of people behind the scenes from Relay, helping out, moderating the chat rooms and keeping everybody on track. And it was such a team effort, and I'm just so happy. I told you this when I guessed it, that when you told me 50,000, or was it 75,000 was the original goal? Yeah, 75.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, they're going to beat that. But man, $250,000, that's great.
It's serious, right? And
that's awesome.
And I don't want this to go by without mentioning Mike and I's wives, so Mary and Adina, were there. They were extremely helpful. They actually ran not only Relay's social media, but the social media for Mike and I both personally. And that really was a huge help because we know we wanted to share things as they were happening, but we would be completely unable to do so. And so we actually had a strategy for that. So the tweets that Relay sent during the show were pre-written. Again, they were in like the Google Sheet with all the planning. Adina would take those and then change them if something in the schedule had changed. It was like, okay, on this hour, so-and-so's coming, we're going to do this. And then she would post photos with those tweets. And then Mary and Dina also handled our personal social media, retweeting things, sharing things on Instagram. I'll have my stories highlight in the show notes if people want to see a bunch of pictures from the weekend. So that was really helpful, just knowing that all of that was just being taken care of. Again, normally we're doing that, but this was too big for us to do it on our own. And so Mary and Adina really stepped up and were extremely helpful in that regard.
Yeah, well, congratulations, friend. I mean,
Thank you.
That was great. That was great. Now, in the back of your mind, you're probably already thinking about next year, I bet.
We're already talking about it. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by our friends over at 1Password. 1Password is a critical part of my workflow because it knows all the logins for all of my accounts, and not just the important ones like banking or a credit card or something like that, my Apple ID, but any online account that I have. I actually just this morning had to deal with something with the state of Tennessee, had to log into some online business account, some terrible state website, and 1Password, it knew that password, so I was able to log in quickly and easily. One of my favorite things about 1Password is that the team over at AgileBits work really hard to support the latest Apple technology. So iOS 13 is just out, and 1Password 7.4 for iOS is ready for it. So they have dark mode, which looks so good on the iPhone with the OLED displays. So dark mode in 1Password for iOS. They've even added a special dark icon, which looks really good. But they've gone further than that. Dark mode is cool, but things like voice control are really important because it allows everyone to use an iOS device with their voice. And 1Password is there on day one with iOS 13 for support for voice control. So you can search, open, edit, and share items all without ever touching the screen, which is just fantastic. I love when the apps and developers that I love and use every day, when they are there with new features on day one, and 1Password is always in that camp. It's also back to school, so I like to talk about 1Password for families, which allows you to share a vault or multiple vaults of passwords and logins with family members. So you can have some set up for just you and your significant other. Maybe you have a kid going off to college or high school. Maybe they have an iPad or a notebook in school, and they want access to some passwords, but not all of them. You can set up and share just with those students, just with those kids. And it makes it really easy to manage. We've been using 1Password for families at home since it came out, and Mary and I really do love it. Head on over to 1password.com/MPU to learn more and to sign up for a free 30-day trial. And when you do sign up, you'll get 20% off. That's 1password.com/MPU.
All right. We did a show on launchers and got a bunch of feedback on that, particularly aimed at Alfred.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on Alfred, and it was inevitable going into this episode that there would be things about Alfred and LaunchBar and Spotlight, honestly, that we would not have time to or that we would miss. And there were a couple of things that people in the forums really wanted to make sure that we had covered. So a lot of this comes from the forums. If you're not on the forums, you should go check them out at talk.macpowerusers.com. I'm actually going to put the thread for this. This episode was 497. I'm going to put the thread for that in the show notes. I think it's a really good example at the awesome community we have over there. But some features that we didn't get to or that we weren't quite sure on, we have some clarification now. But before we get to that, David, you were using Spotlight and Alfred and LaunchBar and like some sort of Rube Goldberg machine of app launching. So have you settled down onto anything?
Not really. I mean, I kind of wanted to be bilingual. I started using LaunchBar first, and you know how it goes. you get those shortcuts under your fingers, so that's the one you use. And as we talked about in that show, Launch Bar, Alfred, if you're using one of them, you're fine. You don't need to switch. They're both really powerful and awesome. And they do seem to like catch up with each other with each release. Every time there's any release, one of them gets whatever the other one just got and adds something new, and then the battle's back on. But I just wanted to get better at using Alfred because I'd never really committed to it. And I've been using Alfred primarily. I switched my, my option key? Yeah, my option key to Alfred, which had been Launch Bar for many years. And I really like it. Alfred's great. I mean, it's an awesome app. I do like the user stuff. We're going to go over some of them in this segment, but I'm really impressed with the way the users have stepped up with Alfred. Where if there's a feature that's not there, like one of the, Launch Bar has great emoji support. Somebody built it for Alfred. It's not there by default, but with one download, you can have that feature. And I do like that, the ability to improve upon the application that Alfred gives you.
It's almost as if Alfred is like a foundation, and you can build your own house atop it, right? Where you can have two people side by side who have been using Alfred for years, and their installations look vastly different because they've customized them to infinity and beyond almost, right? Like they can even look different visually, but all the plugins and the things you can use, it really makes it flexible.
Yeah, agreed. And some of the feedback we got back was there's a feature on Launch Bar that I really like, where you can select files in the Finder or on the desktop and then just press a button and then they're selected in Launch Bar. And I like to do that for like moving files or file management type stuff. It's way better than like trying to grab them with the mouse and drag them and place them somewhere. It's probably just as good as hitting Command C and Command V, which you can now do, in the Finder on Mac. But I like the idea of just selecting files and having them with this launch assistant, so I can do a whole bunch of stuff to them. Resizing photos is a good example. After we publish a show, somebody wrote in, there is a keyboard shortcut for that. It's Command plus Option plus backslash. So if you have something selected and you hit those, then it selects it in Alfred, and then you can do all the, file management stuff on it. And I would add to that this doesn't just work on a single file. With Alfred, you can select a group of files. So like if you've got a bunch of stuff on your desktop, you can, select them all with the mouse or selectively select them and then hit this magic shortcut, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah, and you can, like with everything else, you can customize this. In Alfred, this is under the preferences and then actions, file actions. So you can change the keyboard shortcut if you use Command backsplash or Command Option backslash with something else. But you can also turn off and on file actions. So for instance, if you never want to copy the path to the clipboard, you could just uncheck that action and it won't show up in that pop-up window. So you can customize. If you only do the same 2 or 3 things normally, you can weed those out, which is nice. I think we said this in the episode. I'll say it again here. If you're exploring any of these launchers, spend time in their preferences, because you will discover things that they do that you didn't know were there, because most of these don't have much of a UI, right? They're basically just boxes you type into. And so you can really dig in and see what they can do, learn about their features by going through the preferences. I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, like one of the things I've done with Alfred is I've created some custom actions that search just like my legal clients directory. So it's very easy to get to a specific client directory. I just type SL for Sparks Law, then space, and then I can type in any client name and I get exactly to their directory in the Finder, which is really, really fast. One of the questions I had that I couldn't figure out before we'd recorded that show was the Launch Bar trick to select multiple files from within Launch Bar. Just like sometimes you select files on the desktop, you want to activate them in Launch Bar. You also want to pick up files as you're doing searches through the Launch Bar window. And of course, there's a way to do this in Alfred too. They call it the file buffer. And as you go through it, and I have to be honest, I just got around to figuring this out about a half hour before we started recording. And it was been an OmniFocus, but that darn field guide, it took all my time for a month. But Anyway, so I've been playing with it, and the idea is you search, like maybe you search for a folder, and then you can arrow through the individual files and collect certain ones, and then you can move, copy, pastes, and do whatever you want with those files. And that's a feature I very much want. In fact, I still use Launchbar for that feature, but I want to do it with Alfred as well. And there is this file buffer, and the way it works is you hold the Option key down, and if you hit Option key arrow up while you're on a file, it adds it to the buffer, and you can add multiples. And arrow down, I believe, selects the file and goes to the next one. And then if you hit Option arrow left, it removes the file. So you can, there's a way using keyboard shortcuts to kind of populate that file buffer with files, and then you can easily send them off as an email or move them to a new location or do whatever you want to do with them. All that being said, I figured out the mechanics of it, but I can't get it working because for whatever reason, when I hit the Option key with arrow up, it opens a new Finder window for me. And I have done so many automations to my Mac, I actually don't remember what is triggering this.
Oh, no.
And I want to talk about that in a second. Keyboard conflicts are a thing, right? So all of us power users start adding things to our devices, and suddenly we've got additional stuff happening. So I've got this keyboard conflict. When I hit Option arrow up, it opens a Finder window, and it's not a Keyboard Maestro script because I went through all my Keyboard Maestro scripts. I've not used that as a trigger. And I have gone through if you go through the preferences, the keyboard pane on your, this is the way I would troubleshoot this problem. You go through the preferences pane on keyboard, you've got a list of keyboard shortcuts in there. I've got through most of those now. I don't see that there's a conflict there. And it's interesting because it's opening a Finder window. It's not opening like an alternate Finder like Pathfinder or Forklift. So I don't think it's a third-party Finder app that's causing this. But between show prep, and I only had like 5 minutes to sort it out, I still haven't figured out exactly what the conflict is. And so I wonder, maybe it's a Launchbar conflict. I didn't think of that.
It could be.
Yeah. But it's an interesting thing that we have happen as nerds as we start getting better at other things. Sometimes an expected behavior just doesn't happen.
Yeah, like you said, you build multiple systems, and I wish there was a way in macOS to see some sort of like a master list of like all keyboard shortcuts known to the system, but that doesn't seem to be easily done. So you're kind of left hunting around for what past you did, right, at some point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because must be a known issue with Alfred, because if you go to the preference pane Steven talked about, you go to features/file search, there is a button there to change the modifier key to Shift Option, so I can hold down Shift Option and arrow up and add it. But that doesn't do anything for me. So my keyboard conflicts are expansive and all-knowing.
Oh boy!
If I put 10 minutes into this, I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll report back on a future episode. But it happens.
Yeah, let us know if you track that down.
my struggle.
Mm-hmm. Something else we spoke about then was using Alfred and its custom workflows. And from that forum post, someone had linked to this really neat emoji search by James Sumners. I installed this. It's over on GitHub, but there's a download package of just the Alfred workflow, so you don't have to worry about figuring out GitHub. Like, you just go download it.
Yeah.
And how this works is it has a hotkey, and you can basically search for an emoji by name and then hit return to copy it to the pasteboard. So if I start typing green, I get, green apple, evergreen tree, leafy greens. And if I hit return on leafy greens, that is now on the clipboard, so I can paste it in wherever I'm going. I've been really impressed with this. I've been running it for a while now. And honestly, I think I'm going to move to this over Rocket, which is an app we spoke about in our menu bar episode months ago, which is a little Mac menu bar, and it lets you put in emoji wherever you're typing, like you can in Slack. But I've become a little frustrated with Rocket over time. Like I the way I want to use it is kind of the opposite of the way that it wants to work. Where you start typing and you can move the arrows down and select what you want, or keep typing. And I try to use the cursor sometimes, and it freaks out. And I sort of like the idea of like having Alfred do a lot of things and letting it eat other menu bar apps slowly that I use. And so I've been using this emoji search in Alfred for a couple of weeks now as like the way into emoji on macOS, and I've gotten really fast at it. And because I use a clipboard manager again in Alfred, I don't mind that it's on my clipboard if something else was there. So I'm gonna keep rocking with this. And from the history of it, they seem to be really good at updating it when there are new emoji available in the system, which we'll get later this fall. So I'm gonna give this a shot for a little while.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this action is not only can you save it, the default behavior if you hit return is it saves it to your clipboard, but I believe if you hit Option Return, it saves the code to the clipboard, the emoji code.
Ooh.
And then if you hit Command Return, it pastes it in the other app, the active app before you went to Alfred. So it's really well done. And I love the idea of removing apps like Rocket. As much as I like little apps, sometimes I like having one big app that does a bunch of different things.
Exactly.
And this kind of solves that problem. Some other real-time follow-up. As you were talking, I went through my Mac and shut several unneeded applications.
Mm-hmm.
And now the keyboard shortcut works. So
hooray!
If I have more time, I will go through and next time I boot up, I will shut them down one at a time until I find the culprit. It's some application conflict. It's not a system keyboard shortcut conflict. So now I figured it out. All right. Alfred, good stuff. Lots of good feedback on that episode. What's your favorite emoji, Stephen? Really,
what's my favorite? The one I use the most is the orange heart. That's sort of like my thank you sort of emoji, like in places like Slack.
Yeah, you send that to me a lot. I feel like that's like the heart. It's like you're sending me love, but not that kind of love, right?
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know if that's my favorite. It's my most used. I don't know what my favorite would be like just on design. For some reason, the steak emoji, like the little piece of meat, always sort of cracks me up because it just looks like a tiny steak. I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite. You sprung that on me.
The zap, it's a lightning bolt, sparks.
Yeah.
I gotta love that. Then another way people do emoji, in case you didn't know, is Control-Option-Space on your keyboard will open up Apple's kind of emoji picker, which does a decent job. It kind of lays them all out for you. Like if you don't know what they look like, you can scroll through them and pick them.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep a list of favorites, which is very handy if you just do a couple. But I think this Alfred-based method is faster and probably more fun, too.
Yeah, I think so.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Text Expander. Unlock your productivity with Text Expander. With Text Expander, you can take anything you write repetitively and make it automatic. The example a lot of people like to think about is their cell phone. How often do you type your cell phone? Don't you hate writing those parentheses and hyphens and messing around with the keyboard? You don't have to do that with Text Expander. Mine is cell with 2 C's, CCELL. My cell phone gets popped right in wherever it is. But Text Expander is so much more than that because Text Expander is made by a gang of super geeks that love making things work automatically on your Mac and your iOS devices. With Text Expander, you don't just fill in pre-generated text like a contract term or your cell phone number. You can actually have it give information from outside the world inside your pre-formatted text. Like one of the things I do often is whenever I talk to somebody about something important, I might take notes from the call and I just type XDTS for X is the beginning and then date time string, XDTS. And it puts in the date and the time. It grabs it from the internet and pops it in as text wherever my cursor is. And that's a great way to capture notes. So I know exactly when I spoke to the person and then I can write a few notes underneath about what we talked about. You can do fill-ins where you can type in names. Like when we do customer support for some of the Mac Sparky stuff, if somebody has a problem, quite often I will use a Text Expander snippet and it will prompt me to fill in their name. So I can just have Text Expander fire off the email response, but it'll say insert name. And then I type the name in, puts a name in, and it personalizes it. But it even goes a step further than that, because TextExpander also works with popular scripting languages. So for instance, I have an Apple script that will take the recipient's name from an Apple Mail email. So if I write an email to Stephen, it'll look at the to line and say, oh, he's writing this to Stephen. So TextExpander will prepare the reply for me, but it will grab Stephen's name using an Apple script from the subject line, and it'll say, hi, Stephen, comma, and then fill in the text for me. All this stuff is just amazing, powerful automation tools that you get with TextExpander. And if you really dig in with this as a Mac Power user, you're going to really love it. It's available for Mac OS, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. Hearing from a lot of listeners that have to go to work and use a Windows computer, and they're so happy now they get their TextExpander over there. Once you get your subscription, you've got it on all the devices. They sync your snippets for you, so when you go to work, you've got that great snippets and TextExpander features that you have home on your Mac. And if you're a show listener, you get 20% off for your first year. So head over to textexpander.com/podcast. They have a near and dear place in my heart. They were the very first sponsor of this podcast. They're wonderful people making some great apps. textexpander.com/podcast. Let them know you heard about it here on the Mac Power Users.
All right, let's talk a little bit about backups. And I wanted to talk about Backblaze in particular. We had a lot of feedback around this and some questions that we wanted to make sure we cleared up about the online backup service that you and I both recommend. We both use it. There were a lot of questions about Backblaze's policy of a 30-day history. So how it works is if you delete a Keynote document from your desktop on your computer, it will remain on Backblaze for 30 days. And then after that, Backblaze will remove their copy of it. So you can think about this in contrast with Time Machine. Time Machine will keep that old Keynote file on the Time Machine drive until that Time Machine drive fills up, which could be, for some people, months or years. And so you have a longer safety net with Time Machine than you do with Backblaze. That's why we recommend the 3-2-1 rule, right? Where you have multiple levels of backup. So you have a longer safety net with Time Machine, and Backblaze gives you the protection of having your data off-site, but you don't want to rely on just one or the other. For me, the 30-day history is not a big problem at all. Backblaze, like we discussed, is my third level backup. If I've got to reach to Backblaze for something, it's really out of convenience. Like if I'm on the road, I can use their iOS app to download a document that wasn't in Dropbox or something like that. But it's something to consider. And it leads to this question that we didn't address because honestly, I didn't think about it while we were prepping for that show, is what happens if you're using Backblaze on a drive, say an external drive, that is offline most of the time, or you're going to take it offline, say you're going on vacation, you're going to shut down your computer, or you're traveling or something like that. That 30-day window could come back to bite you, right? Because if the external drive isn't seen or the computer isn't seen for 30 days, Backblaze, according to this policy, would get rid of those files. And so they have a really helpful document. It's in the show notes called What Happens to My Backups When I'm Away. And it does reiterate that any internal or external hard drive needs to be connected and scanned by Backblaze at least once every 30 days. They do send lots of emails saying, hey, your computer's been offline for 7 days, 14 days, 21 days. You need to get it back online so we know what's going on. But they do allow you to pause Backblaze for up to 6 months, which is basically just freeze everything as it is. There's directions on how to do that in that document, so you can go through there if you're in that situation. But I think for most people, most of the time, including myself, I have a laptop that I don't use every day. Sometimes I go weeks without using it. I've never run up against this, and so I think that unless you're just in a really unusual circumstance, the 30-day history is not a big deal from the way I see things. What do you think?
Well, I think you need to be aware of it. And and actually, it's funny because this has kind of benefited me. A few times I've had my archive drive go offline for one reason or another. and I didn't notice. I just didn't look in the Finder and see that the little archive drive had been disconnected. And I got an email from Backblaze, and then I was able to just reconnect it and be back in shape. But the whole point of it, I guess, from my vantage point, was an extra benefit of this is when you have external drives connected, you get to back those up. And I love that because I have so much content on those external drives that are connected directly to my device. I think this kind of weighed in on my ultimate decision to not use like a NAS drive, because I'm like, well, I'm getting the online backup with stuff directly connected. I mean, there's also the speed. There's the fact that these external drives have gotten so much cheaper over the years and lighter, and they're bus powered. So they're just so much easier to deal with, that I decided I will take on the responsibility of getting all of this backed up to extra drives that I lost when I had a NAS that was duplicating everything all the time. Mm-hmm. I'll take that on responsibility for the trade-off of cheaper, lighter, and always backed up to Backblaze. So there's a trade-off here, and you definitely need to be aware of that when you make that decision. And if you're going to be using a service like this and expecting it to back up drives that are going to be offline for more than 30 days, well, I guess we should have covered it, but honestly, it never occurred to me either, because I've always got these things attached. So yeah, you got us. We missed one.
Yeah, like I said, you should be aware of it. I think you're right, but I think for the vast majority of circumstances, it's totally fine. And I can understand from Backblaze's perspective why they do this. Time Machine's different. You bought a drive, you own it, it's local USB, most of the time, or across your network, but it's to a target that you own. And Backblaze, to their credit, we spoke about this, they're an engineering company. They build these huge server farms full of hard drives. But even as they do so, there has to be some sort of limit to what they keep, right? They can't keep everything that was ever on your machine. And I think 30 days is a reasonable cutoff. And if that's an issue for the way that you work, look at something like Arc Backup, which allows you to do things even to like the B2 Cloud, which Backblaze runs, or S3 or something like that. There are other options, but I think Backblaze wins for me because it's easy to set up, it's cheap, and I don't ever come across that 30-day timeout.
But one of the nice things you found in researching this question was the ability to pause your Backblaze backup, which I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, it's really cool. So it's in the preferences. You basically make sure it's all the way up to date, and then you set it to say only backup when I manually say so. And that starts a 6-month counter. You still run in at the end of, say your drive's going to be offline for a year, you'd still have a problem. But if you're, traveling the rainforest for 2 months in between semesters of school, like 6 months will cover you.
Yeah. Nice to know.
Yeah.
We got a question about iCloud drive folders.
We did. A lot of people were asking, well, does Backblaze, does it capture things that are saved to my Dropbox or specifically to iCloud Drive? And for Backblaze, they will back up files that are locally on your disk. And so that seems like a straightforward answer, but it can be a little tricky. So in terms of just iCloud Drive, so David, I know you use this, you have your whole system of folders and subfolders. As long as those are synced to your Mac, Backblaze will back those up because they are local on the disk. Where you run into a little bit of gray area is with iCloud Photos. So on my iMac Pro, I have Photos set to download all the high resolution original copies. And so if I go into Finder right now and I look in my pictures folder, my photos library is absolutely massive because it has tens of thousands of pictures, thousands of video, lots and lots of stuff. If you're on a machine with a smaller SSD, you may not have that. You may have iCloud, or you may have the Photos app set to just download thumbnails. In that circumstance, Backblaze can't back up your original full-size photos because they're not on the local disk. Backblaze cannot navigate iCloud and request the full-size images. Any that happen to be on your local disk will be backed up, but it's not a guarantee. And we had a lot of questions about, well, if I want to back up my originals, how do I do that? And the answer will be, if your internal drive doesn't have the space, buy an external hard drive and set Photos up to sync its library to the external drive. I've got a link in the show notes on how to do that from the K-Base. and it's really pretty straightforward to do. And then you tell Backblaze also get this external drive. So if that's a question for you of how to get those iCloud photo library files onto Backblaze, you got to have them locally. That's absolutely critical for Backblaze or any other cloud backup to work, because they can't go out and like negotiate with iCloud to get your files back. Same thing with Dropbox. You can have Dropbox folders not synced to your local machine. So I have a lot of Dropbox folders that I need access to once a year. But most of the time I don't need them, and I don't want them taking up my bandwidth syncing files around. And so they're not synced locally. Backblaze can't back that up because they're not on my local disk. They're just on Dropbox. So it's important to understand, if you're using a cloud service, where your data actually lives. And if it's on your internal drive or on an external drive, Backblaze can touch it.
It's not that easy to know these days whether you have your files downloaded or not. And I think this is particularly a trap if you're on a laptop. But like when I bought my new iMac a couple of years ago, I bought the big hard drive because I just wanted to know all times I'd be able to download all of my photos and all of my primary documents. And one of the reasons was for backup and just having immediate access to them. If you go on your Mac into About This Mac, up under the Apple menu, and you look under storage, you'll see there's options there. One of them is to optimize your storage. And if you go down that rabbit hole, it will start storing files in iCloud for you and not necessarily telling you that they're stored there. Apple kind of does this in a way like, we know best, just let us take care of it for you. Don't worry, your pretty little head. I don't like the way they do that in some ways. I mean, I understand what they're going for, because people don't want to manage that stuff, but it's easy to get confused about that. And if you're on a laptop with a small SSD, you may have even been prompted at some point to push that button because you were running out of storage. And those are the folks that get into trouble with a service like Backblaze, because Backblaze, like Steven said, it's there to back up the files that are on your drive. Well, if it's stored in iCloud, you'll see an icon for the file on your drive, but the actual file won't be there because there's not room for it, and they're managing it for you. And when you need it, you tap on it and it downloads a copy, so long as you're connected to the internet and everything works, except that backup didn't work. So just be aware of it. Make sure you understand. And whether using Dropbox or iCloud, those are the two most popular. They both, Dropbox does it kind of more manually. You do it in the settings. You tell it what you want and what you don't want. But they're even I forget what the name of the service is, but they're trying to do it as well, where it kind of just manages it for you. And that's only going to become more of an issue going into the future as cameras get even bigger sensors, and and the files get even bigger. I think cameras and photo files are really one of the big issues here. But for me, all of my main files are downloaded and stored locally on my Mac. Same thing with my photos library. And if you only have a laptop and you just ran out of space and you had to do that thing where you sync it to the cloud so you don't have one place that all your photos are downloaded, you need to fix that. And one way to do that, like Steven says, this is something that would justify buying an external drive. They're super cheap. You don't need to get an SSD, but just have one place that you download all of them locally. And I know Apple's got really good at iCloud, and there's probably a small risk of losing data, but why don't you have a copy of it yourself anyway?
It's a good thing to be aware of.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for the question on this, because it's kind of like a little gray area that you can miss if you're not aware of it.
Yeah,
and this is another one like to talk to your family members about, because the non-Mac Power users listeners are completely clueless to this, and all of them buy that's the reason Apple sells the entry-level laptop with the too small SSD.
Yeah.
So they all run into it and they just push the button. Okay, cloud storage, Apple, whatever. That's good. And they don't realize that they're not backing anything up.
Yeah, you can make a mistake without really even realizing it until it's too late.
This was an expensive month for me. I bought some Apple stuff, but I also bought a Stream Deck.
I'd forgotten about this until it showed up in this document. I was like, oh yeah, you did buy that. So how's it going and how are you using it?
Well, it's great. I mean, the reason I bought it is I'm going to be doing an update for the Keyboard Maestro Field Guide, and version 9 of Keyboard Maestro added Stream Deck support. And, I've always wanted an additional set of keys to make things happen on my on my Mac. I talked when we did the Keyboard Maestro show about how I really like the number keys, not necessarily to do number key, touchpad entry, but to have like another pile of keys I can tie to macros. And this is that, but it's external.
Yeah. So this is basically a little box. I guess is it USB to the iMac?
Yeah.
And it has a bunch of programmable buttons, right? So you can change what the buttons look like with icons and colors, I guess.
Yeah, it's a programmable keyboard that Elgato sells, and it's called Stream Deck. It's made for people that want. We were talking about Twitch earlier. If you want to do live streams to Twitch or YouTube, and have a way, it's like a control surface. The video production houses have been using them for years, but this is kind of custom made for the home gamer or maybe streaming prosumer kind of thing.
Okay.
Or you could set them up, and it's got a bunch of programmable stuff related directly to YouTube and Twitch built in it right out of the box. You can also program websites into it and whatnot. Like if you want to go to 512pixels.net, I can put a button on here and I just tap it. It opens Safari and brings me to that web page. But with Keyboard Maestro version 9, that's the reason I bought one, honestly, because it allows you to use these buttons to drive Keyboard Maestro scripts. The whole idea of automation is triggers and actions. Well, now I've got 32 additional triggers sitting on my desk at any one time. And it's actually more than that because there's different ways you can trigger the buttons. You can do a long press versus a short press and things like that. But 32 is enough for me at this point. It's really well made. It's plastic, but it's got a screen technology in the back of it and behind each button. So when you set up the buttons, you can copy in an icon, and then you can and then you can give it a label or not give it a label. So you can add your own additional icons. And then all of a sudden it becomes very customizable. So very visually you can look at it and press any button and make things happen. I'll share in the show notes. I think I can share these. If they're still available on the internet, I will share them. It's a group of Star Wars icons. I think they were made for OmniFocus originally, and I've used them for years. And I added a bunch of these. So like my morning routine button to get me to email and all the stuff I do in the morning is, I call it do, because of that quote from Yoda. So I've got a little Yoda face here. I just tap my Yoda button in the morning and I can get going. There's different kinds of sleep I do with my Mac, and I always did those traditionally with keyboard shortcuts. Now I've tied them to specific buttons. The things I'm finding it really useful for are kind of complex web interactions where I go to multiple websites. I find it very useful for setups, like screen setups. Like I can push one button and my computer sets itself up for legal, and push another button, it sets my computer sets itself up for podcasting. I've also found it very useful for some of the Keyboard Maestro scripts I use to generate documents as a lawyer, where I press a button and things start happening. And all of this stuff was available beforehand. I was getting by with all of these without a Stream Deck. Because I had a bunch of complicated keyboard shortcuts, but the simplicity of a button, there's something nice to that.
Right.
And it looks nice on the desk. You've got the custom icons, you reach over, you press the button. It's not a must have, but it is, if you have a lot of automation on your Mac, it is a nice to have.
You could straighten out your option arrow up with this.
Yeah, I could. But, for that, it wouldn't make sense because with the whole point of Alfred is to have your hands on the keyboard
right
already and to be able to run with that. You don't want to lift your hands off the keyboard. But
of course, but it would be cool.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. But for me, I find it like the kind of startup things, or like I said, I need to generate a group of legal documents, and I have templated and automated some of that. I press a button and that gets it going. Or like I said, sitting down at my computer, and I have the top row just for different setups of how I use my computer. And there's something about just sitting at the computer, looking at that and pressing the button related to the mode of work I want to go into, and then my computer automatically setting itself up for that. It's really nice. And, with Keyboard Maestro, basically, there are no rules. There are no limits to what you can do to automate your Mac. And now you can tie all of that to one of these buttons.
I think you need to set one of these up that's red with a trash can on it, and it deletes the selected file in Finder. It's like a really intense way to delete a folder or a file.
Yeah, I like that.
Go to the trash. Boom.
I wonder if, because I know there's like a way when you format the drive where you can do multiple erasures. Maybe there's a way you can like really kill a file on the Mac.
That'd be good.
And I'll have to look into that.
That'd be awesome.
I'll put like and I'll use for the icon, I'll get the little nuclear symbol.
Oh, that's good.
Toxic.
Yeah. That file's gone forever.
It is fun finding the right icons to fit to it, because this is a visual device. I mean, the reason you buy it is you want something visual. And I was always kind of tempted by those gaming keyboards, and I'm not talking about the full-on keyboard, but I'm talking about the little things that like go to the right or the left of your keyboard. They have a palm rest usually on them, and they have a bunch of keys and maybe a little toggle. Mm-hmm. But I was always attracted to the idea of one of those, but they just look goofy, and I'm not a gamer. At least I'm definitely not a Mac gamer. I just couldn't live with the idea of putting it on my desk,
Right.
This is actually way better for what I want, because I've got a custom icon that's on the button. It relates to what I want the device to do. It looks nice on the desk. I've got it pushed back far enough so I don't see the cord stretched across my desk. That's another big problem for me. My anal retentive. I'll send it. I'll put a picture in the show notes of how I've got this thing arranged on my desk. But it's really nice.
I'm glad that I'm glad you're liking it. I don't think it's for me, but I'm glad that it exists for people who want something like this.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's definitely not. I was getting by just fine without it. It's a little bit of a toy, but it's a toy that is sticking.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Pingdom, the company that makes website performance monitoring really easy. And everyone loves a fast website. Pingdom is helping keep your favorite sites online, things like Netflix and Amazon and Spotify and Slack and Relay FM. These are just a few of the companies who trust Pingdom to take care of their website monitoring. Websites are complicated today, but you can monitor any site transaction with Pingdom, stuff like user registrations and logins, or maybe checkouts, much, much more. Pingdom cares about your users having the smoothest site experience possible, and if disaster strikes, you'll be the first to know with their robust alert system. And it's super easy to get started. All Pingdom needs is your URL, and they take care of the rest. That's it. So go to pingdom.com/relayfm right now for a 14-day free trial with no credit card required. And when you sign up, use the code MPU at checkout to get a huge 30% off your first invoice. Our thanks to Pingdom for their support of this show and Relay FM.
All right. Since we last did a feedback show, we've covered iOS 13. It's been released, and you've been able to spend more time with it.
Yeah, it's here, and I have a couple of one thing in particular that's really bothering me that I didn't think would bother me.
Okay.
And I wanted to air my grievance with you, David.
All right.
iOS 13 has a dark mode. It's great. You can turn it on and off manually. You can have it set to come on in the evenings. I have discovered, like on the Mac, I don't want to use dark mode all the time, but there are some apps that I prefer to use their dark theme. So in iOS 12, say Overcast and Tweetbot, you could use a dark theme even though there was no dark mode in the OS itself. And there have been a couple ways developers have approached this in iOS 13. The official Twitter client allows you to keep that app in the dark theme even if you don't use dark mode in the OS. So everything else is bright, but I want the Twitter client to use its darker palette. That is how I prefer to use Tweetbot. I like Tweetbot in a darker theme, but at least with their first version of Tweetbot that supports iOS 13, they have locked the dark theme to the dark system mode. So if I want to use Tweetbot in a dark theme, I have to be using dark mode everywhere else. And I just feel like even though it adds complexity, that apps should have a toggle to respect the system mode or to be manually set in their own themes. Because there are people, I think a lot of people, judging the Twitter conversation I saw about this, who want to use iOS in the light mode, but they still want certain apps like Tweetbot or Overcast to be dark. And I don't know what market's going to do with Overcast yet, but Tweetbot at least has broken this. And I think it's a mistake because I think people do want the most customization possible. I see their side of it. I see that, if you're using dark mode, you want a dark theme. If you're using light mode, you want to use a light theme. But I don't think that sticks to everything all the time. And you can default it to be that way, to respect the system setting. But I think there should be a way that users can break that link and decide on their own if your app should be dark or not.
Yeah, but that's really up to the developer. I mean, they could put a preference in there that allowed you to not respect the system dark or light mode, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will probably become the best practice, but this is still the early days. And I think, like with Tweetbot, people are giving them a lot of feedback this week about this, and I think they'll probably change course and give people that option. But it's just, anytime there's a new big system feature, their developers implement it in different ways until it sort of settles out into best practices. And I expect that will happen now. But for now, it's a little frustrating that just because I want to use the light mode most of the time, that all my apps, or at least a lot of my apps, are stuck there, at least for now.
I had a funny Twitter moment this week where I loaded the native app. I hadn't used it in a long time. And I'm very used to these third-party apps that are pretty simple for Twitter. It's just a timeline of all the tweets, and they're in order. And I had kind of an old man moment where it's like I couldn't understand how the app was working, and it's like, how come the most recent tweet it was showing me was 10 minutes ago, and how come where's the rest of them? And it's like they've built that Twitter app around their business model, not around the traditional way Twitter worked. And I felt really dumb for a few minutes. It took me a while to kind of figure out how the app works.
I agree with you. The official Twitter client is a bit overwhelming at times, and I don't love it. I do keep it around because there are features that aren't available in third-party clients. In the past, there have been times where I've taken Tweetbot off my phone and just have the Twitter client, and that does make me use Twitter less because I don't like that client. And I may end up doing that once Twitter for Mac comes back in Catalina, because they're going to have a version based on their iPad app. And I'm going to give that a shot because there are features that are nice, but if you're used to the simplicity of Tweetbot or Twitterific, the Twitter app's a little bit messy in places. I think you're right about that.
Well, I'm going to use it now because I don't like that feeling of not understanding how something works. So I'm going to master it. But
and it's inevitable that will be the only way we can access Twitter anyways, right? Because they are going to slowly killing third-party client.
Yeah.
So it's coming for us.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, having used it, by the time this show airs, 13.1 will be out.
Yes.
So we're going to be out of this weird phase where we have the new release, but some of the best parts are waiting for a week and a half.
And it's not out on the iPad yet, right? Like it's been a messy release cycle.
Yeah, it is, but it's okay. In fact, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that they bit off more than they could chew this year?
I've thought a lot about this. I don't know if they bit off more than they could chew, but clearly at some point this summer, something came off the rails. And whether that's because they were trying to do too much or because one big project went sideways and affected the rest of their schedule, I tend to think it's the second, because Apple basically rolled back all of the iCloud Drive changes.
Yeah. And
I wonder that when they were trying to implement iCloud Drive changes, like shared folders and a bunch of other features that aren't here and they're not in 13.1, that made them take their eye off the ball for a while. And by the time they decided, okay, this is not going to make it, it was kind of too late to catch back up. That's my pet theory. I have no sources or little birdies telling me that's right or wrong. That's just my pet theory in my experience, sort of managing, software projects and the few times I've done that in my career, because you can get hung up on a feature and then you sort of realize that you've spent a lot of time and not made it anywhere. I think them rolling out 13.0, then holding the iPad for 13.1 and doing that all a week later, I think they're making the best of a bad situation. I would imagine that moving forward, whatever happened, Apple is going to work really hard that it doesn't happen again, because I'm sure they're unhappy with the way this has gone because it's really public. And, we'll see if they improve next year. But even if they don't, I do think it's time for Apple to realize that everything has to be in 0.0 So last year, group FaceTime wasn't available at launch, and they rolled it out a little bit later. And none of us would be talking about this if Apple framed it as, these are the iOS 13 features. We expect these to be available earlier, and then over the next several months, we're going to roll these other things out. If you just say that in the beginning, you don't have all this hand-wringing on the outside when things don't ship, and maybe Apple should rely on that language more in the future.
Yeah, what I don't want them to do is say, okay, we're going to really scale back our expectations every year, because that creates that's a separate problem. I mean, that's why the iPad, people stopped buying the iPad, and why all of us on podcasts and blogs were complaining all the time, because it wasn't growing fast enough. They weren't fixing it fast enough. So I really feel like it's okay if you don't get everything out with the 13.0 release, with the 0.0 release, so long as you're working on it and you're going to make it right. I feel like that's okay. And I think people need to be willing to accept that if they want the platforms to grow. And I think that's pretty important. I'm loving files. I'm loving shortcuts. I'm getting email. And thank you, everyone who purchased the Shortcuts Field Guide. I really appreciate your support. And I love hearing back. I mean, people like customers, and even people who haven't bought the Shortcuts Field Guide, but people are making their own apps now with shortcuts. I think it's kind of the dream, right? You have a unique problem on your device and you make your own custom solution for it. I remember reading an article about when they made the first Apple computer, they didn't have any software to ship with it because Woz thought, well, everybody will just make their software. You'll buy one of these and you'll write the program to solve the problem that you have. But of course, they learn very quickly. A lot of people don't have the skill set and the time to learn the skill set to make their own stuff. But Shortcuts has lowered the bar so far that I'm hearing some awesome emails and seeing some great things people are making. And they're not even using like the most advanced features in Shortcuts, because they've got the power low enough in the stack now that you can do a lot with it. So I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool to see those coming in, and I'm particularly excited now that 13.1 is out. That's going to get even more interesting with the automation stuff.
Yeah.
And, we talked about NFC stickers, and they just keep popping up around my office.
I got an email from a listener that had an obvious suggestion. I haven't even written him back yet. I haven't had time, but he said, don't put multiple stickers, just put a sticker and then have an if statement in your shortcut to look at the time. Like if you want a morning versus a night one, you can put an if statement if it's before X. That's true. It's kind of more complicated, the reason I have two, but that was a good idea. I mean, I think there's just going to be a lot of fun discovery with this as we go forward.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a new era with shortcuts, as we spoke about.
Yeah. And you said that you're getting into the new Photos app too.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying it. There's this new feature where I'm reaching for my phone as I talk, it will give you the highlights on a given time period. So if you look at months, for instance, I see September 2019, August 2019. Oh, August 2019 is a picture of you and Quinn at our podcastathon.
All right.
And what's cool about this is it changes over time. So if I look at years, it's my youngest's birthday this past weekend. And I see in 2014, I see a picture of me holding him as a newborn. And then basically every year since then is a picture of his birthday party, because we're right around that time, over the previous years. And you could have searched for that in Photos before, but it was kind of buried. And now it's just showing you what it considers the most impactful or the most interesting given that time period. And of course, it changes over time. I'm really enjoying that. I think that's super cool because it is surfacing things in my photo library that I haven't thought about in a long time or haven't seen in a long time. And that's pretty special.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest problems with photos these days is that it's so easy to take a lot of them that discovery is an issue. I mean, I talked about this, I think, on a prior episode of Mac Power Users when I was a kid. our family didn't have a lot of money. I think we had like 1 or 2 rolls of film a year, so it was really easy to find the pictures. Usually there was the obligatory picture of each kid standing next to their cake on their birthday, and then a couple at Easter and a couple at Christmas.
Right.
But or the Halloween costume shot too. But the now, my family, we take more pictures in a day easily than when I grew up we took in a year. So discovery and finding the good ones is such a challenge. I think they've come a long way. I mean, I've not made a mystery of the fact that the next field guide is going to be about photos. So if you're listening and you're having a particular problem or have something you'd like me to help you out with a new photos field guide, send me an email, because I'm still doing a lot of the course layout. So I'd love to hear what people's problems are. But this new version, I mean, this has been a progression. It didn't just happen this year, but over the last several years, I think they've really helped a lot with the discovery problem.
I mean, I've got almost 50,000 items in my photo library. Like, there's no way I can manage that manually. And so for it to surface things, I'm having a lot of fun with it.
And we mentioned this on the show last week, but the thing that really stands out for me, and we're going to talk about our new hardware in a minute, but is now applying all those photo effects and corrections to video is amazing. That's something that I like a lot more than I it's something that I needed and I didn't know about. You know what I mean? Now that I have it, I can't imagine life without it. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by FreshBooks. Go to freshbooks.com/MPU for online invoicing made easy. Hey, freelancers, you want to save 192 hours? Our friends at FreshBooks can help you do just that with their super simple cloud accounting software. By simplifying tasks like invoicing, tracking expenses, and getting paid online, FreshBooks has drastically reduced the time it takes for over 10 million people to deal with their paperwork. They've got some great new features. One of my favorites is the new notification center. It's like your own personal assistant. You'll always know what's changed in your business since you last logged in and what needs to be dealt with pronto. They also have the way to track the email to the client, so it'll show you whether they've seen it, which puts an end to the guessing game as to, well, did they see it or did they not see it, when you're trying to decide if they pay you. I'll tell you, I became a FreshBooks customer a few years ago, and the reason was because I was doing all my MacSparky invoicing through like a Pages document and a number spreadsheet. And that, Stephen, was not cutting it. I wasn't paying close enough attention.
That makes me nervous.
The fact is, then I would forget about an invoice, and after 6 months goes by, isn't it on you, really? Can you really ask someone to pay a 6-month-old invoice?
Yeah.
So I realized that I was losing money because of my desire to keep things simple. And so I just signed up for a FreshBooks account, and I found out it's actually easier. Generating an invoice, you just click a button. Once you have the vendor in the system, you click their name, you type in the amount, you send the invoice, it tracks it for you. A lot of the customers, they pay the invoice immediately because FreshBooks has that great online payment system. It's just, it was such a dummy move for me not to do this 10 years ago. But I love FreshBooks. They're great. I'm a customer too. If you want to try them out, head over to freshbooks.com/MPU and enter Mac Power Users in the How Did You Hear About Us section. You get that 30-day free trial for listeners of the show. There's no credit card required. And if you're having any problems getting paid, FreshBooks will help you out. Once again, that is freshbooks.com/MPU. And thank you, FreshBooks, for all of your support of this show and Relay FM.
So there are new devices out.
Yes.
We spoke a little about this on the Podcastathon and other places, but we've had them a little while now. And to me, at least, it's about the camera this year. I'm curious how the camera on your 11 Pro has been treating you so far.
I love it. Every year the cameras get better. I feel like this year the improvement to the camera is more noticeable than it has been in years prior. The couple things that have stood out to me is backlit photos. We went to Disneyland yesterday, Sunday afternoon, celebrating, got the field guide out. We all went to Disneyland and had brunch together. And the sun was kind of low. It was early in the morning, and I took some pictures of my family, and they were backlit, and they came out great. And it wasn't like I was testing that feature out. I just took the picture, and in days past, I would have held up the camera and said, oh, they're backlit and their faces are dark and I can't see their faces. We can't take the photo. We all got to move. But then actually the picture just took out. And the only reason I know it worked because then my wife took some pictures of the kids from the exact same place with her XS, and they didn't come out because they were so backlit. And so that stood out to me. The third lens on the Pro is great. So I have so much choice now with the camera. I tweeted out a picture. I'll put a link to the tweet in the show notes of the Ferris wheel at California Adventure from all three lenses, and it's quite a bit of reach.
The ultra wide is a lot of fun, a lot more fun than I anticipated, because it gives you not only a different perspective, but just they feel much bigger than something that you would think would come from an iPhone in a sense, right? Especially like landscape. I don't know. It's been really cool to play with it, and I'm excited to really push it. I haven't gotten to shoot much outside, and I'm looking forward to getting out and doing some landscape type shots with it, because I think they're going to be really cool.
Well, a couple things about the ultra wide that stood out to me was, number one, I mean, landscapes are great, but getting close to somebody and shooting ultra wide is a very interesting kind of artistic thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I did a couple of those. That was really fun. Also, like, we went into, because I was at Disneyland, I went to Batu. I don't go to Disneyland without visiting the Star Wars, of course. And there's a shop in there called Doc Ondor's, and it's like they've got tons of memorabilia and stuff from all the movies, the Star Wars movies. And I'd always gone in there, and I've taken a lot of pictures, but I could never really get the breadth of the room because it's a really high room, but it's relatively small. And getting that wide lens, really, I got some great pictures with that. And the other thing I get with the ultra wide lens that I hadn't even thought of is the portrait mode now allows you to shoot portrait 1x or 2x. As, traditionally portrait mode had to use the zoom lens as the primary lens.
Right.
And so the problem is if you were in kind of tight spaces, or like, let's say just you're sitting across from somebody at the dinner table or at the lunch table, and you want to shoot a portrait shot of them, they were way too close. You almost had to like get out of your chair and move back to get that portrait shot. And now you just hit the little 1x button, and then it uses the primary, I guess I'd call it the normal lens, and the wide lens to get the portrait effect. And you don't have to get out of your chair anymore. So that's kind of nice too.
The other thing that's sort of interesting with the cameras is the selfie camera also has a wider angle. You can turn the phone into portrait mode, or you can tap on the UI and it backs it out a little bit. So if you're taking a group selfie, that's a lot easier than it has been. Google did that or noticeably did it with the Pixel last year, and I'm glad Apple's caught up with that. That front-facing camera is a lot better than it used to be even a couple years ago.
And then have you played it all with night mode?
I have at home, and then we actually did a demo of it on the live show where the studio, we turned off all the lights, and it's pretty wild what it can do. I want to get out this, I'm hoping to get out this weekend with the tripod, because if the phone is on a tripod, I can shoot for even longer. And of course it would hopefully look a little bit better because there's no handshake in it.
Yeah.
But the phone does a really good job at trying to work out any handshake, because it's got all sorts of sensors knowing what the phone is doing. But even just handheld, it is incredible what it can shoot. And then you like put the phone down and look with your regular human eyeballs and see the difference. It kind of doesn't make any sense.
No. And I haven't, like, Renee Ritchie, I think, just did a video comparing the night mode between all the other devices. And I don't know which one's best. I've never used any of the Android devices. But it is such an improvement for iPhone, regardless of how it stacks up. Mm-hmm. We had some friends visiting Saturday night, and we were outside in the backyard, and then we wanted to take a picture. I don't know if I ever told you this, Stephen. There's a stormtrooper in my backyard.
Oh yeah, I'm aware of his presence.
Yeah, well, it's the we were having a good time, but it was late, and like I have some solar lights out there to light things, and the solar batteries had run out, and so it was dark back there. But they wanted a picture with the stormtrooper, so I'm like, well, let's try it. And I went out and took this night mode picture, and it came out really good. It was shocking how good it came out to take a picture in relative darkness.
It's pretty wild, and I think it will just get better with time.
Yeah. What about battery life? Have you noticed a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the 11 Pro, the regular size, and I think Apple was saying 4 hours more than the 10s at the regular size. And I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I'm not doing like severe battery testing over here. But I can tell you, it definitely does seem like at the end of the day, I've got a lot more gas left in the tank than I would have on the 10S. I was never super thrilled with the 10S battery life, but it seems like the promise they made, they seem to help their end of the bargain with this. And so far, I've really been happy with the battery life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the science is out there yet or exactly how they improved it so substantially in 1 year. When watching the presentation, I thought it was the chip because right before they talked about battery life, they had the guy up talking about how now we can turn off essentially individual clusters of transistors. So we're using way less power on the CPU. And then the next thing they say, oh, and also we got 5 hours of battery. I thought that was why, but I guess the battery is actually bigger in it. And there's probably a lot of reasons, but like I said, we went to Disneyland yesterday. We did the official Disneyland test of the new phone. And I did not bring the battery case. In fact, I don't have a battery case anymore. And the external battery I didn't bring either. And I had like half of a battery left when we didn't stay the whole day, but I used substantially less battery than I normally would when I'm there. The Wi-Fi there is terrible, so you're always using the cellular radio. I'm taking lots of pictures, and because it's a new phone, I'm playing with it the whole time. It's great. I'm curious to see over time. I have a different story about the new watch, but we'll get to that in a minute.
I think they will probably be a battery case for these. There was a rumor floating around that it looked like that was coming. They're just going to be unstoppable with a battery case on them. I mean, can you imagine? Especially the Max. It's going to run forever.
I think I'd probably take a pass on that, honestly. I did get the battery case for the last one because my wife and I had, last year was Daisy's upgrade year, so we both had the identical phone. And she does the things she does for work. Sometimes she has really long hours at work, and she works for Disney, so she's dealing with all those problems I told you about every day. And
every day.
So for her, we got it kind of for her, but then I would borrow it whenever we had, like if I had a trip. Whenever you get on an airplane, having one of those battery cases really just solves the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with the amount of battery I have here, I can probably just put an anchor and a cable in my bag and be fine. But we'll see. I like the green.
It's a lot nicer than I thought it would be. In fact, in some lights, it looks like the space gray. It's a lot more subtle than I thought it would be. How do you feel about the green tinted stainless steel edges?
That's the part I'm least excited about.
Really?
It feels it reminds me of like my 70s upbringing, the tint of it. It's kind of a strange tint, but that's okay. I'm over it. What about you?
I went with the space gray this time. I've done silver the last couple of years, and I really did it to help maybe minimize the weirdness of the camera bump. Like in the black leather case, it's sort of all dark and the white glass isn't really highlighting the camera bumps. I don't care for the black stainless look. I like the bright stainless around the edges, but in a case, you don't see much of them.
Yeah.
The green, like I said, the green's nicer than I thought it would be. The silver, of course, is exactly what you expect. It's the same as it's been. But I think that it is something, if you're curious about the green, it's worth seeing in person if possible, because I think you'll either know it's for you or not pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, I don't regret it. I would, if I had to do over again, I would get the green again. I like it. But now you said you've got it in a case. So what case are you using?
The black leather Apple case, which is what I had on my 10S. I have broken a lot of phones, and I'm trying to behave and put it in a case. I will say, once the weather cools off and I can wear long pants, with like real pockets, I won't have it in a case every day. But in shorts weather, you're asking for trouble because it'll just shoot out of your pocket. So for now, at least it's at the black Apple leather case.
About the clear plastic one for it, and I'm not going to use it very often, but like when we went to Disney the other day, I put it in there because I knew everybody in the family was going to want to use it, and I didn't want to, I don't know, I'm just manic about my new phone, I guess. But but generally I don't keep mine in a case, and it's never really been a problem. Knock on wood.
I keep an Apple note of my iPhone breakage history. Would you like me to read it to you?
Well, how many entries are there?
Let me find it. There are several. I broke an iPhone 4S, fell out of a car, I dropped an iPhone 6 down a flight of stairs in a parking garage and shattered it.
That's good. Well, if you're going to do it right.
The thing exploded. I bent an iPhone 6 Plus.
How'd you do that?
I kept it near the emergency brake in the car I drove at the time, and I pulled the emergency brake up. It was like between the seats, and it bent the phone.
I love that. It's like cantilevered.
Noticeably bent the phone.
You're like, man, this brake is really stiff today. Just keep yanking on it.
What's that crunching sound? Brakes sound terrible. I broke an iPhone 7 Plus screen. I knocked it off my desk in my studio. And my studio has rugs in it, but it's a concrete floor, and it fell right between the rugs onto concrete.
Love it.
I broke the back of my iPhone 10. I still don't know how I did that. One day I pulled the case of it, or I flipped it over. Oh, it was in a case. I pulled it out of the case, and I cracked the back. I don't know when that happened. And then my iPhone XS Max, I dropped a socket onto it underneath. I was working on my truck, and I dropped a socket, and it fell directly onto the screen of the phone and broke it. It was in a case, but no case was going to save that, right? Because like it was just the screen.
Yeah.
I don't have a great track record, is what I'm saying. It's not good.
I once, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago, we were coming back from a family event, and we had a bunch of my kids and my wife were in the car, so the usual spot where I put my phone was occupied, and I made the mistake of like putting it between my legs in the car. And then when we got home, I got out of the car and forgot it was there, and then it broke. But
that's how my 4S broke. Is the first phone I broke. Exactly the same thing. It fell face down on concrete, and I knew it was done.
Yeah, but that's the only break I've had. I've been pretty lucky, and I rarely use a case, but I do buy the Apple Care because after a year they get handed to my kids, and then we always use up the Apple Care.
They will break them.
Yes,
I
in
can't
year
judge.
2. It's like at one point one time we were going somewhere and my daughter dropped her phone. Like it was a impressive drop. It didn't break it, but it was an impressive drop. And I just said, "You really hate that phone, don't you?" And now that's like a thing in my family. Everybody talks about how they hate their phones.
That's good.
So I get the Apple Care, but I'm usually pretty good. I like my green one. I don't really understand this U1 chip thing. I'm looking forward. I guess Apple's has a tile competitor that they're working on, and it's going to give your phone like sonar powers, but I haven't really figured that out yet, but I like it. I also bought a new watch though.
Yes, I am extremely interested in this because you bought the titanium. What did you wear before? You had an aluminum before, right?
I had a steel one, and then I bought aluminum because I was getting them so frequently.
Right.
But I decided to like spoil myself this year, and I was listening to all my friends on podcasts that buy fancy watches, and I'm never going to do that. But I do want to have a nice Apple Watch, and
sure. And
you can resell the old ones, and I actually was not going to buy one this year. The old story, right?
Oh yeah.
But the always on thing. It was like immediate, like, yes, I want always on. I want that. And since I'm going to buy one, I decided to buy the nice one. And it was $100 more than stainless. And I don't know, it was a luxury, but I really like it. I like the weight of it. I really like the way it looks. I'm looking at it right now, smiling.
It is really nice. So you have worn the aluminum and the stainless. My impression from reading the numbers and then handling them in the Apple Store is that the titanium weight-wise is basically in between the aluminum and steel. Does that line up with your usage?
It feels more like aluminum than it does like steel, if that makes sense. I feel like it feels lighter than heavier. The taps on it are a little more distinct than with the stainless steel. But otherwise, it's just, you could get by with the aluminum. It's fine. But I just wanted to get myself something nice, and I love it. The one thing that's interesting to me is I talked about how we had that party at our house Saturday night. For the first time, and as long as I can remember, I got the warning saying, "Hey, your watch is running out of battery."
Whoa! I don't think I've ever seen that on my Series 4.
Yeah, this was like 10 at night, and Daisy and I went to the gym at like 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, so it was a long day, and I had done a long workout, but I got the message that I hadn't seen in a long time. Like, that's interesting. I never saw that before, and so I'm watching it. Like right now, as we're recording the show, it's 1:00, and I'm at 77%, and I did the same. I had a 6 a.m. workout today, so it's not terrible. But for whatever reason, that day I used up the battery, and that's something I am now aware of. Like it's a thought to me now.
I'm curious how that goes over time. Some people say, I think there's probably something to it that these devices do a lot in the beginning, right after you set them up, and maybe it'll settle down.
That was my second day of ownership, so I'm sure.
I bought my wife a Series 5. She had the 38 millimeter Series 3 aluminum, so the small one, and I bought her the 40 millimeter, so still the small one, but a little bigger, aluminum Series 5 as a surprise. I bought it for her and gave it to her and said, hey, this is for you. And she's really liking the always-on display. And for her, coming from a Series 3, my expectation is the battery life will be better. She hasn't complained about it yet, but I know on the Series 3, there were some days she would hit the power reserve, in the evening, especially if she had a long workout. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. She's been sick this week, so she hasn't worked out with it yet, but I'm going to keep an eye on what she says about that. But I think she's really enjoyed it so far. And I got to say, even though I don't wear one every day, I have been tempted by it. I've actually wore my Apple Watch almost the entire week leading up to the podcastathon.
Funny how that works, right?
Yeah. Well, because we were so busy and we were on St. Jude's campus for basically 2.5 days and, doing stuff leading up to it, I wanted to be, if something was coming on my phone, I wanted to be aware of it because I wasn't at my computer. In my office, I'm at my computer all day. I can see when a Slack message comes in. I don't need my Apple Watch to tell me. But I was like, oh yeah, there are things about that I do like. I still don't want to wear it every day. But the titanium is really tempting because I, like you, had stainless. This Series 4 is my first aluminum watch. And I honestly just don't really... the aluminum looks fine and the lightness is nice. But I miss the harder display. This has got scratches on it. And I like the look of the titanium a lot. It kind of looks like a DeLorean, right? Like the Back to the Future car.
Yeah.
Even though, ironically, that car was made of stainless steel, it sort of has that same finish to it. The brushing, at least to my eye, is not really super noticeable. Like in some of Apple's pictures, it looks like you could see the brushing on it from a mile away. And it's actually very low key, I think, in person. It sort of diffuses light. I think it's really nice looking. If I buy one, I would be tempted to go that route. But at this point, I still plan on skipping this generation just because I don't use it every day.
Yeah, well, it's nice because it's a little more rugged looking, but it's also very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it can work with a suit, it can work with jeans.
Yeah.
But I really like it. It's interesting. It has a couple custom watch faces, or at least one that I'm aware of. And I've never had that experience before, so that's kind of fun.
It's the fancy edition.
Yeah.
What do you think about watchOS 6? I did not run the watchOS beta because that seems like a really bad idea. So it's new to me. I like the new features. I like the warn me about loud noises, and I really like the new watch faces. I actually really like the California watch face. It's extremely flexible. I'm gonna put a screenshot in the show notes so you can see how I have mine set up. And David, I wonder if you would share yours as well.
Sure. That's my primary right now too.
Okay, yeah. Shoot me a screenshot. I'm going to send you mine right now so we can look at them in real time. Mine is very straightforward. It's basically monochrome. I have some around the edges. My complications are Todoist, the date, the next thing on the calendar, and then the weather via Carrot Weather, and then activity. And that's really the 5 that I need. I honestly could get rid of Todoist if I only had 4 slots. But I really like the way this looks because I always liked the original utility watch face. It was like sort of the same thing, like a circular face with complications around the edges. And I thought they sort of messed it up when the watch got bigger. And so I've kind of recreated it here with California, and I've been pretty happy with it.
Okay, so I'm trying something that's even kind of a bit more extreme for me, because I've always liked the thing about the Apple Watch being that it's a computer on your wrist and it can give you so much information.
Right.
But, I need reading glasses at this point, unfortunately. So when I tried out the California face, as you explain it, you've probably got the circular version with the complications around the edges. The way it displays the date, it gives you the day of the week, and then it has like a rotating dial underneath with the actual date. It's actually quite small. And if you have if you have a little bit of a issue with reading without glasses, it's almost impossible to see the date on that. So I decided, what the hell, I'm going to just take all the complications off. I use the big square version of it. And that puts the date on in a way that I can read even without glasses on. And, the main thing I need when I look at my watch is the time and the date. And then I put some more, nerdy faces to the immediate right of that. So if I need to, I can swipe over into information when I need it. But I've been trying and actually I did install the beta about halfway through, because that's what I do. So I've been trying to use this face for quite a while now, even on the old watch in this fashion. I kind of like it. I think it looks classy. This cream color is the edition color you get if you buy the fancy edition watch. We'll put it in.
Yeah, it's nice looking.
And so I've just got the moon phase and the date and the time. My one complaint, and Marco Arment actually tweeted about this over the weekend, and I totally agree, is they need to make the hands on this California face the opposite of the face. Because the way they do it is, if you've got the white background, it's got white hands with a little black line around them. Or if you've got the black background, it's got black hands with a little white thing around them. I feel like the hands, like it should be black hands on white face, or white face on black hands. And maybe that's a fancy watch thing that you're not supposed to do. I don't know. But I think it'd be more readable if they did that. And interestingly, with my face, when it goes into, the frozen mode, I don't know, what do you call the mode where you're not looking at it, but it's displaying time?
Yeah, I've kind of referred to it as like low power mode, but that's not right. Yeah, I don't know. When you're not looking at it mode.
Well, exactly. When you put this California face into not looking at it mode, it gives you white hands against a black face, and it looks great. I just wish I could do that, always. But anyway, I like it. And then I am using some of the more, like I'm using the infographic modular and a couple other faces as well. For like, I have a whole watch face devoted to like health and fitness, where it gives me my rings and I can kick off a workout, and it has the weather. So I've got like a bunch of computer nerdy faces, but just for the walking around face, I realized I don't need to see all this stuff, and I kind of like just having the time and the date on it. Yeah,
no, it looks nice. I have always used the solar face for that. Just like I usually add the weather, because that's one thing I really want on my watch face.
Yeah.
If I want something less distracting or like a little bit cleaner, I do kind of wish too that you could have, maybe you can, before I say this, let's actually check. It would be nice to be able to have multiple instances of the same face.
Yes, you can.
You can. So I could have like a California set up the way yours is set up, and then have one set up the way I want mine set up. So that is nice.
Yeah.
I still just long for the day of third-party watch faces, or even more customization. I think that even though California is really customizable and the new ones are pretty nice, it's still hard to get exactly what you want. And some people don't like what's there at all. And it seems like Apple could open that up in a way that made sense for everybody. So fingers crossed.
Oh, I agree. I think third-party apps would be great. And there's a watch face I also kind of discovered in the last year called Explorer. I think it came with the cellular watches originally, but now I think it's on all of them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the successor. I always like the utility face, but the utility face has never recovered from the transition to the larger watch face. I mean,
yeah, a lot of them just kind of died for me.
Well, I mean, it's just the way it displays complications and what it's not that good. So the Explorer is another one. Like the Explorer is the one where I show like what my next appointment is, and it gets me to OmniFocus. That's kind of like the let's get to work watch face. But but there's nothing wrong if you've got an Apple Watch with having a bunch of faces and just swiping through them. I've got one for when I go to Disneyland. It's a collection of little Star Wars icons in a saved in a photo gallery. And so rather than, putting pictures of my kids up, right? I've got the photo face pointed at this one gallery of icons. So when I'm walking around, I got a little R2D2 on my watch. It's kind of fun.
There you go.
Take some, if you do have an Apple Watch, next time you have some downtime, fiddle with the faces a little bit. You may find that, you can have different contexts. Like I do like the idea of like, there's the work face, there's the workout face, like the Breathe app, which everybody makes fun of. I like that. I use the Breathe face too when I want to kick off a little short meditation session. So there's a lot you can do with that watch. I am not giving mine up anytime soon.
No, I totally understand that. And it was interesting to wear it for the majority of a week. The things that bothered me about it continue to bother me about it, but there's definitely still room for it in my life, even though it's not every day.
And Mike Hurley was giving me a hard time when I bought a fancy pin. He's like, "Oh, you bought the fancy pin. Now it'll be the watch. Just wait." And I'm like, "Nope, that's not going to." I really, the nerd part of me is still strong enough that I just love the idea of having this always on computer on my wrist. It doesn't bother me at all. I am pretty brutal with the notifications on it, though. Very few notifications get through to my wrist. But the ones that do get through are ones I want.
Well, you've got to be, or just be going off all the time. I think that's the key thing when someone buys a watch is spend a good bit of time on those screens and be willing to go back in and change things as you go.
Yeah, when the watch first came out, a bunch of the reviews were complaining that it's like too distracting. Mm-hmm. And it really got me kind of upset. I'm like, you guys, like these are people who are like reviewers for like the Wall Street Journal. I'm like, can't you figure out how to turn that off? I mean, come on. Jeez. Anyway, maybe we should do a show someday on managing notifications across the board with Apple stuff.
That'd be good.
Well, if that's interesting to you, let us know in the forums or send us an email that may go into production.
Yeah.
All right, gang. Well, we went a little long today, but feedback shows usually do.
There's a lot of stuff to cover, a lot of stuff to talk about.
Thanks for listening. Since the last feedback show, we had show 500. Tons of amazing feedback from that. It feels really good hearing from folks who've been listening to the show for so long, and they're still learning a lot from it, and we love making it, so we're going to keep doing that. We will see you next week. Thanks to our sponsors, 1Password, Smile, Pingdom, and FreshBooks, and have a great week, everybody.